Whee! Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have a bit of a different video for you. It's a plant spotlight, but for once we're not focusing on an aroid. Today I'd actually like to talk to you about my OXALIS triangularis because I get a lot of questions about this plant. So as always with my plant spotlights, let's go through the journey that the plant and I have been through over the last 2 or so years. And then I'll tell you everything that I learned about this plant over this time. I'm also going to try and repot this today. I'm pretty sure it needs repotting, so we'll do that later on as well. So let's just have a quick look. So you can see this is a very, very lush pot of oxalis, and it's honestly one of the only non-aroid plants that I actually grow in my apartment and that I appreciate. All right, so let's start off with the journey. So I got this plant as just a single corm. So a corm is the little thing that these leaves will eventually actually shoot out from. So I just got a single corm from a friend in around about June 2020. Yeah, so I was gifted the corm, and to be honest, I wasn't really too interested in growing it because, you know, my heart is with aroids for sure. So it's kind of like a little bit out of my comfort zone when it comes to the kind of plants that I'm growing. But I thought, you know what, now that I've been gifted one, why not try and grow it, right? I probably wouldn't have purchased it if it wouldn't have been given to me. Now, the first photo I actually found of this plant is from July 2020, and it's just kind of hidden amongst other plants. But you can see that at that stage, that single corm that was potted up started shooting out 3 leaves, right? So actually when I initially got it, it was a corm with 1 leaf on it, but these really hate change in situations, change in environmental conditions and so on, and just dropped their leaves really, really quickly. So when I got it, it actually dropped its 1 leaf, but I didn't do anything. I just, kept it potted up in its little potting medium, and it reshot and gave me like 3 leaves within the first month or so, right? So nothing too impressive, but honestly, I wasn't too interested in growing it large. I actually didn't realize it would grow that large, that lush, and could look that nice. You can see that by November 2020, I gave it 1 repot, so it's in a slightly larger pot, and it definitely started giving me a few more leaves. And it also started growing its first little flowers as well, right? So it was definitely happy, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. I didn't really, I didn't really give it the spot that it probably wanted. So it was probably getting not enough light over the first year or so. And I only really started giving it enough light and making it thrive actually this year in 2020. And then on the next photo over here in June 2021, you can see there's hardly any change between November 2020 and June 2021. And that's really because I didn't give it enough light. I would just put it in like a semi-dark corner, and new leaves were growing, but they were kind of growing in the same speed that the old leaves are dying off. So it's just kind of maintaining its size. Look, I'm not complaining. That's perfectly fine. But I didn't really bother putting any more effort in, and really the prime spots in my apartment are usually reserved for my aroids. So I just kind of gave it a spot quite far away from the window just to kind of fill an empty corner and add a bit of color to my collection. I didn't really bother with it too much. In September 2021, though, I was actually putting a little display together for my dining table. I wanted a little centerpiece, and I wanted to mix some textures and some colors. And because this one has a really interesting texture, really interesting color, I don't really grow anything in that color. Most of my leaves are pretty green. So I kind of added that to the display, to the centerpiece of my dining table. And that's really when it started getting sufficient light. So you can see in September 21, I put it in this display over here. And then by December 2021, you can already tell that the oxalis is really taking over that display and kind of starting to suffocate all the other plants, right? So really within 2 months, within those 2 months, it grew more than it grew over the last 1.5 years that I've had it before, right? And then by January 2022, you can see it's really starting to take over that whole display. And I was like, okay, I feel like I need to, isolate it. So that display, they were still potted up individually. I just put 3 individual nursery pots into the same planter to create a nice display. But that way I can also rearrange and so on. So that worked to my favor because eventually the oxalis was just growing way too quickly for the other 2. So I really had to take the oxalis out of there. I used that opportunity to also give it a slightly larger pot, and that really, really kickstarted it growing crazy fast, right? So you can see in January 2022, I gave it its larger pot, and it then actually became the centerpiece on my dining table all by itself. I'll put some photos up, but you can see by March 2022, it got really lush. By May 2022, it was even lusher. So from there on, it was kind of just growing like crazy. I'll pop in this video over here as well, where you can really see that 1 year of growth between June 2021 and June 2022. So really that second year, and particularly the second half of that year, it made a lot of growth, and it really quadrupled in size compared to that first year where growth was really, really slow. Now, I believe it is because of the insufficient light that I gave it over the first year. But also, if you think about it, the more leaves the plant has, the more energy it can produce, the more it's gonna grow as well, right? And so eventually, once it's large enough, it's just kind of like, it's like a snowball effect, and it will keep growing and keep growing. Alrighty, and yep, this is what it looks like now. So what have I learned about this plant? It is a plant that can go dormant, but it has not gone dormant for me since I've had it. So the entire 2 years of me looking after this, it has never gone fully dormant, apart from that very first time when I introduced it to my environment and it dropped all of its leaves. But it wasn't properly dormant. It kind of came back within just a couple of weeks. These go dormant if there's not enough light or not enough temperature, right? So during winter, they would normally stop growing. They will kind of drop all of their leaves. So what you can do is just keep it. I would just keep it in that pot, and I would just not water it. If there's no leaves, there's no need to water it. But then as the temperatures increase and we have more light again, then you can start watering and they should reshoot. But I personally haven't had experiences with this going dormant, so I can't necessarily give you the most appropriate tips. It has actually flowered for me all year round as well, which is pretty much just a sign that I'm giving it sufficient light. So I'm giving this quite a lot of light. This actually, by the way, you might have noticed I rearranged. My dining table used to be exactly here. So this plant was pretty much exactly living over here over the last year or so. And it has light from a northeast facing window right over here. So it gets a lot of bright morning sun. And then as the sun progresses, it gets bright indirect light throughout the rest of the afternoon and evening. Plenty of light and keeping the temperature consistent, keeping the temperature high. And I mean, in an indoor setting, I don't let my apartment kind of drop below 18, 19, 20 degrees Celsius because that is uncomfortable for me. So I'm heating the apartment for my own sake. So of course, the plant is get to benefit from that as well. This plant is really going to tell you when it's thirsty. So I'll pop in a video over here. When it gets thirsty, it really gets droopy. You water it and it bounces back pretty quickly. You do not have to wait for it to get droopy. Like, you know, I don't think the plant necessarily appreciates it. It doesn't harm it, but I don't think it really appreciates it. But if you are worried about overwatering, you know, just pay attention to the plant, and the plant will really tell you when it's in desperate need for water. I personally don't usually let it get quite as far as I did in that video. I kind of just did it to show you guys. But usually I water it pretty much every second day, right? Because it has a lot of leaves in a very small pot, right? So there isn't really much substrate in that pot. So there isn't really much water retaining capacity in there. So if I don't water it frequently, it just doesn't have any water reserves to go with. And these leaves are really paper thin. They're gonna just dry out really quickly. You know, it's quite the opposite to like a succulent, for example. It's very much the opposite. From a fertilizer perspective, once a week I add GT foliage focus into my water that I water this with as well. All plants need food, especially if it's in such a small pot with so many leaves. Where are all the nutrients coming from if I don't actually provide these? I don't think it's necessarily fussed about humidity. So this is living in an environment where it's probably, you know, it can average around probably 50% humidity, but it can go down to 30, it can go up to 70, you know. So it's very inconsistent and really just depends on the weather that we've got outside. But because it actually gets a lot of bright morning sun, you know, it would probably in the morning, the humidity could probably drop to like 20-30% or so on. So I don't think it's necessarily fussed about humidity at all. You should be totally fine in an indoor setting. It just wants sufficient light. And obviously with a lot of light comes the requirement to water quite frequently. I don't have this in my aeroid mix substrate because it's not an aeroid. And we talk about it a little bit more when I do the repotting in a sec. A funny thing that it does as well, when it gets stressed, so for example, if I shake it too much, you'll see later on when I repot it, you can probably notice it already, these leaves kind of like fold in, and they do the same at nighttime as well. So if you kind of disturb the plant, it's gonna fold in because it doesn't like it. And what I usually do to maintain it and make it look good, because as I said, these leaves don't have a really large time span, but they replenish really quickly. So if there's any old leaves that kind of look dead, I honestly just pull on them. So to pull them out, same goes with these flowers where all of the flower heads have actually fallen off. I'll just kind of sit there and I pull on them to make sure that all the leaves that are here actually look nice and neat. And honestly, they replace it themselves so quickly, you don't need to worry about actually making your plant look empty by doing that. So that's how I kind of maintain it looking nice. Otherwise, you'll start having all of these dead little branches mixed throughout. I'll pop in a video over here as well. I try to do like a little time lapse of how the leaves kind of unfurl in the morning when the sun rises. So I thought that kind of looked quite nice. Now this plant really, really hates being repotted, and as a result of that, I've only repotted it twice in those 2 years. And when I repot it, I do not disturb the actual existing roots. I really just take it out of the pot and I pop it into another pot. We'll see that in a sec. The reason for that is the roots are very, very fine. They're not anything like your aeroid roots, right? We're not talking about these thick aeroid roots like a monstera would have. These are really, really fine. And as a result of that, if you actually repot it and you disturb the root system, they're most likely going to die and your plant is going to actually drop probably all of its leaves, right? So when I repot it, I don't disturb the actual root ball. What that also means is like that I never propagated this. I don't know how many corms there are in there. I know that I started with 1 corm, and I know that obviously this is way more than 1 at this stage, but it just multiplied itself, right? I just kept it in that pot, and obviously I keep the pot pretty small as always, but it just multiplied itself. So I reckon that the pot is full of corms. I have no idea how many though, but I never actively propagated any of them. And of course, the more corms you've got, imagine all of them reproduce and all of them double every year, let's say. So the more corms you've got, the quicker eventually your plant is going to grow, right? It's going to be like exponential growth. At the beginning, you have 1, duplicates to be 2, but then suddenly it's 4, 8, 16, right? So the beginning might be pretty slow, but you don't actually need to do a whole lot of propagation work to make this turn lush. All you need to do is give it sufficient time, stay patient, and take care of it in the meantime. Alrighty, so I think I've given plenty of backstory. Let's have a look. I'm gonna repot this, and hopefully that kind of, hopefully I can show you some of the root system or some of the corms in there. But as I said, I don't want to disturb it. So we'll see how we go. All right, because this is not an aeroid, I'm not going to use my aeroid mix. I kind of just made a mix of, it's perlite, cocoa peat, a little bit of propagation sand, and there's like a few chunks of like cocoa chips in there as well, just to give it a little bit more volume. Should be fine. Honestly, again, I never measure. I just kind of eyeballed it. But basically, I want something that's not so chunky. I want a mix that can retain moisture a little bit better because these roots are really fine and can't really afford to dry out. All right. I mean, yeah, this is definitely, I mean, you know, you guys know that I like to kind of give my plants quite small pots, right? And I mean, I just don't think this plant has any more potential to increase, given that it has no room left in there. And I can feel how dense it feels in here as well. So it must just be full of corms. Okay, so I decided to give it this pot, but because the legs are quite leggy, I don't want to pot it up like to the top, because I think it would just make it look a little bit ugly. I want to pot it up to the bottom and then basically just fill the pot till about here. Then you could cut off the top, but I actually like to keep the top on because it's going to help me keep all of these stems kind of upright and in shape, right? All right, so I'll add, where's my thing? I'll add a little bit of the mix to the bottom. Not too much, again, because I don't want it to rise up too high for aesthetic purposes. All right, need to go. Oh my God, this is gonna be a challenge. So I'm just really carefully wiggling around. I don't want to disturb the plant too much. Beautiful. All right, let me go a little bit closer to the camera so you can see that. I mean, you can see how fine these roots are, right? And you can see a few of them hanging out there at the bottom. So I don't want to disturb this at all. You can't really, I don't know if you can see this corm over there. So there's some corms already growing out the top. It's actually not that busy in there. I expected worse, but that's okay. Like, I mean, I'm not really sizing up that pot by a lot. I mean, I don't know what the size was before, maybe like, looks like 16 centimeters. This one is now 20 centimeters. So it's not like I'm giving it a huge lift in pot size. I don't think it's necessarily needed. I just want to give it a little bit more potential to continue growing, especially given that it's spring now. Alrighty, I think I'm okay with that. Obviously, I now need to go ahead and water it. Give me one sec, I'm just going to clean up. Alrighty, now you can see it's definitely closing in, right? Like it doesn't like being disturbed. So it's like, whoop, going back into its comfort zone. Anyway, so I'm pretty confident that this is going to be fine, but if it's not, I think by the time I will edit this video, the plant would have probably died already if it's not happy. So editing me in the future is going to let you know whether this plant through any sort of hissy fit after being repotted, but even if it does throw a hissy fit after being repotted and drops its leaves, I know that it has a good root system. I know that it would have a lot of corms in that pot. So it's just a matter of time for them to come back, right? So sometimes giving it a nice reset isn't even a bad idea anyway. But let's see how we go. I'm going to go ahead and give this a watering. Hey guys, it's editing me jumping on just to show you that the plant is quite happy after the repot. So it's almost like nothing happened, which was precisely my point in not trying to disturb the root system in the first place. So yeah, happy days. All went well. Plant is happy, thriving, and keeps growing. All right, so let's wrap up this video. In a nutshell, if you want to grow your oxalis to be nice and lush, first of all, you need time. You can't expect immediate results, right? So give it time. Over time, these corms will multiply and you will get more and more leaves popping out of these pots. You need to give it bright light and you need to give it warm temperatures so it doesn't go dormant. Of course, if you can avoid dormancy, then it's more likely that it's going to grow lush because it has more time to grow. And you need to just stay on top of watering without drowning the plant completely, right? So that's kind of the way that I grow this plant. And of course, it also needs food, right? If a plant needs to grow, it needs nutrients. So where's it going to take the nutrients from if you don't give it anything to eat? This was a weird video. I felt a little bit out of my comfort zone. We're not talking about an aeroid and we're not talking about moss poles, but I hope that video still helped you guys. I know that it was one of the most requested videos. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope this plant's going to survive. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment, and I'll see you next time. Take care.